Hey guys, right now I'm going to be making the ministry progress summary through April 17th, 2023. So due to some various circumstances, I haven't gotten as much done or as quickly as I might have liked in the last little bit. So just as a quick overview, I have been helping a close friend, so my roommate, get content ready for his own ministry website. And this has ended up taking more of my time than I thought it might, so I have been focusing on helping him a little bit more than doing all of my own things. I also moved into a new role at work, which kind of had a learning curve a bit with the new duties and responsibilities. And then I was very, very busy when I got sent on a business trip for 2 weeks here in the middle of this cycle. And so there are some other things as well, but you kind of get the idea. I had other things pulling my attention here. Nonetheless, this release brings some new content for many of the lessons in the winter series from the Sunday school class we've had at Central Baptist here in Warner Robins. And that study's main topic has been relating to discerning the voice of God. So these are some of the higher level topics that we're going to be going over here. And so just as an initial introduction here, as I said, it's been a while here, coming on more than a month at least, so maybe 7 weeks, something like that. And so I had kind of said in the last progress summary that I was going to try to keep up the production pace, because the last release, I think it was something like 15 pages that I had go up. So quite a large collection of new content there, but just because of some of the circumstances that I mentioned, this last cycle, I haven't quite been able to match that pace that I had there for several weeks. And so it's not that this release doesn't bring anything at all. You'll see, I think there's maybe 6 pages or something like that that I've added. It's just not quite as much as I had last time, and it also came a bit later than I would have liked here. And so I'll go into a bit more depth towards the end of this update into some of the factors that cause things to be a bit delayed here. But for people who aren't interested, you can just kind of stop watching the video or stop reading the summary update here when we get to the bit that kind of goes in details there. Because I know maybe not everyone's interested in hearing about some of the other things going on in my life that may have slowed down some of the release. But until then, we'll just be talking about the things relating to this release itself. So as kind of mentioned here, and this is kind of an important point because I can help build people's expectations a bit here, I have been helping my roommate go through the written content that he will be hosting on a Bible teaching website of his own once he launches. So part of the reason why this has taken more time than I thought it might is because there's a lot more content than I'd realized there was. So I hadn't actually read through much of my friend's content until this point. And this is a very good thing, actually, that there's so much available, because it means that once he goes live, there'll be a lot of good content that I can link to and reference and point people to and things like that. But when I kind of signed up and volunteered for this, there's just a lot more than I thought there was. And so what I'm doing in this, what my role is I'm kind of helping him organize everything and add headers for better linkability of the sections on the pages. And kind of stuff like that. So it's not like I'm rewriting anything that he has. It's kind of just getting it ready to be put up in website format and more referenceable and things like that. And so, like I said, I just kind of hadn't anticipated the degree of time this is requiring of me. But I do think it will be worth it in the end once all of his content goes up. And so the main upshot of this is because I've been helping him with this, in the meantime, kind of since a lot of my time is going here, helping him with his stuff, get his stuff ready for the website. I'm spending more time on that in some ways than I am on my own stuff. And so this will be temporary. This isn't going to be the case forever, just kind of until we finish this push to get his site launched as well. I may be sinking a good bit of my time, although not like 100% of it, just, a sizable chunk of it into helping him with his content. So that's been a main focus of mine. This started not at the very beginning of the cycle, maybe a couple weeks in when I started helping him with this. And of course I got very busy in other things as well, but it has kind of been a primary focus, and I'm actually pretty excited about it too. I think a lot of the content that he has is very good, well written, and it will be useful, covering different topics than some of the things that I've done. So I'm looking forward to being able to have this as another website that I can recommend alongside my own, of course, and Ichthus and a couple of the other ministries that I follow as a good opportunity. So that's why I feel like it's a very worthwhile cause, and it's worth me spending my time here to try to make his release go as smoothly as possible. So this has been one area where I've been spending my time the last little bit. And then, of course, we have the new content on my own website unique to this cycle. So I still got a number of new things up in this cycle. I have several more that are actually really close to being done, but I kind of decided that I'd already procrastinated long enough on making this update, because I've had stuff more or less ready for a couple weeks now. I just kept trying to finish just that one more thing, and kind of decided, because I kept moving the goalposts here, that I just needed to do a release here, get some of the things that I've written pushed out to the world and things like that. So the things that I'm close on but haven't quite finished, those can wait until next time, when I have the opportunity to do another release, when I've had a few more days to maybe edit some of the things that I'm close on and get them more polished and ready to go. But I do have a number of things that are pretty close as well. So, I've done the main writing for several other topics, but just didn't quite get to them before I drew the line in the sand here and decided that it was time for me to make this progress update, because it had been long enough already, of course. So here's the list of things that we're going to be going to through this time. So as I mentioned, many of the lessons in that series about discerning the voice of God, I've added some discussion pages to all of the lesson pages here. So on this one, this lesson was going over, does the voice call you to trust God? So this is one of the mechanisms by which we can determine if a voice is of God or is not of God, is if it calls us to trust him, if it calls us to exercise faith. So this particular study was not new this time. This was new last time. This one was already there, but I wrote several new to this particular release, and the first one here is talking about drawing inspiration from the faith of others. And so this is because one of the passages that our workbook went through was the Hebrews 11 passage that talks about the heroes of the faith and these great believers who have gone before us, whose examples serve as a witness to us, as examples of faith like we ought to have as Christians. And so in talking about those people, kind of a natural point that comes up is, well, what about people who we can draw inspiration from in our own lives? And so that's what this page is about. Kind of talks a little bit about the dangers in comparison. So, obviously there's a form of comparison between us as believers, even including other things in life as well, but specifically for us spiritually, that kind of is not constructive in the way that we would want. But this kind of isn't that. This is just being inspired by people in our lives who kind of shine brightly for Christ and light a fire beneath us as well. And so Bible teachers, older mentor figures in our lives, people who are just very red hot spiritually, all of these people can serve kind of as motivators for us, as we have witnesses in our own time and place and culture who we see running a good Christian race, giving a good witness, and they can kind of inspire us to do the same. So that was one page under this subtopic of does the voice call you to trust God? A couple others as well. One talking about the promises of God and kind of the mechanics of how we don't get everything we ask for as Christians, kind of despite this verse in John 14 verse 13 that says, whatever you ask in my name, that I will do. Well, that whatever there is kind of contingent upon us asking for things that are in the will of God. And so sometimes people might kind of get the wrong idea about this. They feel like what I'm asking for seems to be a good thing, so why isn't God answering me? And so we spend some time on this page talking about how we need to keep in mind that the promises of God are certain, but usually it's not very specific individual things in our lives. It's more things like he will never leave us nor forsake us. He promises us eternal life if we believe in his son and what he did for us on the cross and things like that, rather than, I don't know, promising us a promotion or health and wealth and prosperity and things like that. Some of the things even that people think are promises of God or teach are promises of God that may not actually be in the Bible if we use the Bible as our measuring stick. And so that's this page. And then finally, the last one under this lesson here was talking about Cain and Abel. And so again, we were in Hebrews 11 in our workbook this particular week, and Abel comes up as an example of someone exercising godly faith. He's in this Heroes of the Faith section in Hebrews chapter 11. And so the question that we set out to answer here on this page was, why was Abel's sacrifice praised by God? And Abel is praised for his faith, whereas Cain gave a sacrifice too, a sacrifice of grain, yet Cain is condemned by God and his sacrifice isn't accepted. And so, well, it can't just be that God likes livestock offerings better than grain. God's not biased in that way. So what is the reasoning behind this? Because it wasn't just after Cain killed Abel that God was displeased with Cain. It was actually before that. And so this page kind of highlights some of the reasoning as to why that might be. So perhaps the differences in heart states between the brothers, and also talk some about the symbolism of blood sacrifice and what Abel's blood sacrifice in this context might have meant about him accepting the need for a sacrifice, for a substitute, acknowledging that he couldn't provide that on his own, that his own works were insufficient. And so it's kind of an acknowledgement, it's an inference in this passage, but it makes a great deal of sense and helps kind of explain why Abel is praised for his faith. And so that's the third one that was on this particular section in the series on discerning the voice of God. And so that was three things that we had here, and then we had others as well. So this was the first one, those three things linked here in the slides. Next, talking about, does the voice align with God's character? And so we'd already done some stuff in the last release talking about some of the difficulties in interpreting some specifics in the passage here in Exodus chapter 34, which is where our workbook had us. But the new one this week is talking about reflecting kind of upon God's love as it's expressed in these verses early on in Exodus 34. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. It says, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. And so that in verse 6 and the beginning part of verse 7 just shows the graciousness and compassion of God. And you have to understand in context, and that's kind of what this page is talking about, this page in the new release, is that God is saying this to Moses right after the Israelites had bowed down and worshiped their idol of the golden calf. When Moses was up on Mount Sinai and Aaron made this idol, and they were kind of turning back to Egypt positionally in their hearts. We have a couple cross references for that. I think there's one in like Nehemiah here and one in Numbers as well. So the people were ungrateful towards God. They weren't thanking him for his deliverance from their enemies, but they were making an idol and not having that faith that they did. And right after saying that, God still talks about his faithfulness and his love. And of course, he also talks about his justice in the next verse, but this specifically reflecting upon God's love and his mercy, even in the context of this generation of Israelites who were condemned to wander the wilderness due to not accepting what God would have. So God didn't take them immediately into the promised land. So even this generation who had seen such great signs from the hand of God, even when they turned away and worshiped an idol, effectively spitting in God's face, he didn't cast them off from himself. And that shows the grace and compassion that God has for us. And so that's what this page is reflecting upon God's love for us, even when we sin against him in such a blatant, flagrant way. So that was this page. Also in Exodus 34, just like the other things from this week's lesson about examining does the voice align with God's character? So this is just kind of filling in some thoughts I had on some of the additional lessons in this series that we had in the winter here from our workbook study. So the next one, the wider page, was, does the voice honor God? And so this passage was from John chapter 17, which is Jesus's prayer towards the end of the upper room discourse, which had begun in John chapter 13, so spans several chapters here. But in John chapter 17, Jesus prays for us as believers. And so a page I have planned here is relating to this idea of kenosis, which John 17:5 has, talking about Jesus going back to be glorified after his ascension. We have this cross-reference from Philippians, but didn't quite finish that page. I started, but that'll be one of the ones coming in the future. But the actual page that I did this release was kind of relating to the people that God is said to give Jesus. And so in John chapter 17, verse 2, we have all of those you have given him. So this is the him here being Jesus, and the person giving is God the Father. And so who are these people that Jesus was given? And also comes up in verse 6, you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Who are these people that the Father gave Jesus, and what does that mean exactly? And so this page pretty heavily hits on Calvinism, predestination, and free will. And so this is a passage that some Calvinists use as a proof text for so-called double predestination, this idea that God arbitrarily chooses some people to irresistibly call to himself while just not choosing to irresistibly call other people. And so we examine some of the specifics of that idea of double predestination, kind of defining what Calvinism and predestination in their system of belief is. And then, of course, I am not a Calvinist. I believe in human free will, and I talk some about, basically talk about what believing in free will is not. So believing in free will doesn't mean that we believe that we save ourselves as Christians, or that somehow the power of the cross is made, I don't know, like needs to be supplemented by our own works or any nonsense like that. So I talk some about what it is not. And then we kind of examine this idea of, well, all this means in John 17 is that God gives the people to Christ to kind of pray for and protect in this way. Those are the people who God foreknew as believing in Christ. And so God's foreknowledge is a very critical part of understanding what this passage means. And then after that, we kind of shift into discussion here of the difference between so-called eisegesis versus exegesis. So these are actually prepositions in Greek. Eis is a preposition and ex is a preposition in Greek. Eis meaning into and ex meaning out of. And so when you apply that to biblical interpretation, we want to be taking things out of the text of the Bible, not reading in our own presuppositions. And that's kind of the difference here between eisegesis and exegesis, is that we don't want to be reading in our own presuppositions and assumptions into passages and then using the passages to kind of circularly prove our own position. And why that's relevant here in this passage in John chapter 17 is because actually double predestination along Calvinist lines actually textually works in this passage. The text doesn't disprove it. The text also doesn't disprove the interpretation that I take regarding that the people who God the Father gave Jesus are the ones who God foreknew as believing in him. That works just as well textually. So this passage actually cannot be used as a proof text for either interpretation, because both of them work textually in this specific place. And so I kind of talk about how it's important for us to choose our arguments well. And so we need to be careful when we pick passages that we say support our position, to pick passages that have to support our position, like it's logically necessary that our position be the true one, as opposed to alternative positions that might work equally well in any given passage. So this is kind of getting off into some of the more technical bits of hermeneutics, but interesting stuff. And I argue down here that the verse that actually lets us take kind of a stand against double predestination is Romans chapter 8 verse 29, that talks about how those whom God foreknew are the ones that he predestines. And so it just doesn't make a lot of sense for God to talk about foreknowledge in this progression of foreknowledge and then predestination and then calling, justifying, glorifying. This is Romans chapter 8 verses 29 to 30. It doesn't make a lot of sense for foreknowledge to be in there if God predestines people, because then why would he foreknow the people who he was the one predestining, right? As if their free will has nothing to do with it. So anyway, I'm not going to get too down in the weeds here, but this was what this page on, talking about this idea of people being given to Jesus in the prayer that comes up in John chapter 17, which was the text of our lesson this week. And then finally, just one more to go. Last week in the study, so this was the very last lesson in this study, talking about discerning the voice of God. And this week's lesson was talking about asking the question of if the voice leads us to be more like Jesus. So talking about the transformation that we have as Christians, putting off the old man and putting on the new man, so to speak, or the old self and the new self. Because our old selves were crucified to the cross with Christ. We are positionally dead to sin. We are no longer slaves to sin. And talking about the transformation that ought to happen in our lives as Christians based upon that newness of life we have after we believe, after we become members of the family of God. So the passage this week from the lesson was in Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3 verse 1 starts out talking about thinking on things above. There's a cross-reference to Philippians. I have another thing in work on that. One of the other things I didn't finish this time. But the specific thing that I am going over this time is not that particular thing, but it is this idea on seeking the things above as opposed to things of the world. So less a comparison, but more just focusing on this passage here. So this page, the one that I wrote this cycle, mostly talking about the kind of critical importance to keeping our focus where it needs to be as Christians. So keeping our focus on the eternal and the spiritual versus the physical and the ephemeral, the things of this world that are passing away. And so that's what the first couple verses of Colossians chapter 3 talk about, seeking the things above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. I talk here about a cross-reference in Luke chapter 10 where Martha is kind of bustling about getting things ready for Jesus, and Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus listening to him speak. And Martha kind of gets frustrated and says, "Lord, tell Mary to help me. Can't you see that I'm doing all this work?" And Jesus tells her that Mary has chosen the better part and it will not be taken away from her. And so this can be kind of a hard passage, especially for those of us who kind of feel that we are quote unquote the responsible sort. We kind of sympathize with Martha here. You know, we want to be industrious and work hard for the Lord, but we need to kind of keep our priorities straight. And so what is truly more important than sitting at the feet of Jesus and listening to him, right? There is nothing more important for us in the world because spiritual matters are so much more important. And building off that, talk about this passage in Matthew chapter 6, pretty famous passage in the Sermon on the Mount, talking about how life is more than food and clothing, and God is more than capable of providing for our needs if we just put first the kingdom of heaven. So tomorrow will worry about itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. And so why should we worry about tomorrow if when we seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, God will give all the rest unto us without us having to lift a finger. So God will always provide for our needs. Note our needs, not necessarily our wants, if we just trust him and we give the reins over to him rather than our own desires. And so that's what this page is talking about. We need to just make sure that we keep our focus where it needs to be, our eyes turned towards heaven, as it were, rather than getting bogged down in worldly matters, because keeping that spiritual perspective is so important for us as well. That was this discussion under this topic here, the last one in this particular series. And even saying that, I don't think I'm quite done. I have several other topics in work here, just going back, other things that I was interested in from the passages that we covered in some of these lessons. We'll probably be expanding out a bit more on some things, but this was kind of a good collection, as you see, across several of the weeks in this study, picking out things that I got interested in based on the text that the workbook used for the specific lessons in the weeks, and just elaborating a bit more on things that I found interesting. So that was all of the new content here from this particular release cycle. Like I said, I have several more things in work that I just haven't quite finished yet, but those will come probably next release. So as to things that I will be trying to do moving forward in the future, I had mentioned already me helping my roommate with all of his content, and that's probably going to be my focus. In fact, I may switch on to it more or less full time for a while here until we finish that, until his site goes up, because that way I won't have to keep splitting my focus over time. I'll be able to kind of get that done and then turn my focus back to my own content 100%. So that's going to kind of be my plan. I'm going to try to focus on that for the next several weeks. Unfortunately, that means that it may take me a while to get another of these updates out if I'm helping him with his content more than I'm doing my own. It may take me a while to kind of get enough up that I'm ready to release again. Although, like I said, because I have several things that are already pretty close, except for some editing and polishing, I may be able to get another release out in the not so distant future, just maybe a smaller release with some of the stuff that I've already been close on that I just need to clean up a bit. So that's the plan for the short term in the future. There is some other stuff that I need to do more workflow wise, and I'll get to that in probably like the last of the slides upcoming. So this is the point in the video where I've gone over all of this stuff in this release now, and so you don't have to keep listening unless you're interested in hearing about some of the reasons why this one ended up coming out a bit later than I had intended, like what, 7-8 weeks rather than just a couple maybe, just because some other stuff came up, and that's what I'm going to be talking about now. So my first excuse here was that I've kind of had some issues with microphones when I'm doing this recording. So I'm actually recording with a headset microphone right now. I have a boom mic on a headset that I have, and so this isn't the microphone that I've been using more recently, which is called the Rode Wireless Go 2. So this is a wireless microphone system, and it's very highly reviewed on the internet. I have no problems with it when it works, except when I connect it to my computer via USB-C, it actually doesn't let me adjust the gain setting for the microphone. And in practice, what this has meant is that my audio volume is just really low when I've been recording with this plugged into my computer. And so when it's plugged into the GoPro, it works okay, but I'm not actually recording these with the GoPro. So plugging it into the computer, it wasn't letting me adjust my gain settings, or actually more properly, I was adjusting my gain settings on the wireless recorder, but then it just wasn't going into the computer. It wasn't respecting it basically, and I couldn't set my volume levels if I was recording in Zoom and things like that. It just wasn't letting me adjust the gain. And because this was making my audio really quiet, I tried to clean it up in post by normalizing it, which means you just kind of make the audio louder. You can either increase or decrease the audio volume levels, but it just was kind of normalization isn't supposed to be really destructive in terms of audio processing. I just wasn't happy with the quality I was getting out of that, and so I wanted to actually fix this. And so I did a bunch of research, and I found a YouTube video that says that to get adjustable gain in this way, you actually have to buy kind of like an adapter, like a 3.5 millimeter jack adapter, and then plug the receiver part of the wireless Go system into your computer using the 3.5 millimeter adapter, and then maybe another adapter on top of that to turn that into a USB. I got both of those. That's what the video recommended. So I have some things on order that will hopefully let me use this. And the reason why I want to use this is because it kind of has a really discreet lapel mic. So the headset that I'm wearing right now, I mean, I don't have my webcam on, but it's this big bulky gaming headset looking thing. And if I'm recording videos where I'm recording a shot of my face with the webcam, I just kind of want the discreet lapel mic. I think it looks better. But I was having problems getting the volume to work with that. And so I did research there. It tied me up for a while. Second excuse here, I was getting accustomed to new responsibilities at work. So many people probably won't be that interested in this, but I am a software engineer. I work for the Air Force. And so I actually have been shifting more into project management responsibilities on our team, helping our primary PM with her large set of responsibilities. And so I have started doing more things on the technical requirements side. I'm kind of helping split her load in that way. And it's kind of more or less a promotion, but in line with that, I've gotten some more responsibility and some pressure in some ways. And one of those ways is just that previously I'd kind of been a team lead already, and so I'd already been doing this for a team of maybe 5 or 6 people, and now I'm kind of doing it for everyone on our project, which is more like 18. And so obviously it's not that my workload has tripled per se, but different scope, a different set of responsibilities, and just there's a bit of a learning curve as one would expect with new duties at work. And so up until this time, like I said, I'd already been leading an agile software development sub-team. So our project has 3 teams actually working in parallel with each other, and I was the team lead for one of those, and now I'm kind of helping do project management stuff for the entire project. And so because of that, I haven't had as much time. I had more pressure at work, and I've had a bit of a shift in responsibilities. It's kind of taken more out of me as I acclimate myself to the new things that I have to do. And it's also just, in many ways, I think this will be useful in the long term because I'm pretty interested in the stuff I'm doing now. But, this change at work has sucked some time and attention away from me. So that was another change. And then, of course, pretty soon after I got this new set of responsibilities, I got sent for on a business trip. In the Air Force we call it TDY. I think Temporary Duty Yonder is what the acronym stands for. I got assigned to go to a different Air Force base to work on our project with our customers. And so because of that, I was away from home for 2 weeks. I was in a hotel for 2 weeks. And so because of that, I was working on this business trip, and I worked pretty hard on the business trip. We had long days of meetings, with our customers, and 7-hour meetings, 2 weeks straight, more or less. And then I also pulled a lot of overtime when I was on this trip, just because it made sense. I had everything fresh in my mind, and if I didn't do it, I wouldn't get it written down and documented as well. So maybe 15 to 20 hours of overtime over the 2 weeks I was up there. And then I also drove up. So this was in Ohio was where I went. And so that's about 10 hours away from where I am in Georgia. And so because of that, I sacrificed a weekend day on either the weekends, bookending my trip there. I sacrificed a weekend day to drive that, and I'll get the time back as travel comp time, but I haven't taken that yet. And then the weekend in the middle, I was actually visiting a friend who lives in Columbus, and so I didn't get a lot done that weekend either. And so because I tend to get a lot of ministry stuff done on weekends, because it's when I have less responsibilities, like of my daily variety, like going to work and working out and things like that. Because I had to give up weekend days here, I actually kind of inhibited me more than you might think on the ministry output front, because I lost like 3 weekends in a row basically to this, on top of the extra duties at work and stuff like that. And then finally, last thing is kind of what I was alluding to as I was wrapping up the closing part of the actual video. I kind of spent some time on some things that might help improve some of the content moving down the line, so workflow related things. And so I'm going to call this investing in the future, kind of a hobby project of mine. I finally got the custom mechanical keyboard that came, completely split hand. People who are really into mechanical keyboards can probably geek out over it, but most people probably won't think it's that interesting. But long story short, I'm hoping to actually start transitioning to fully touch typing. I am a pretty fast hunt and peck typist on QWERTY, like above 50 words per minute, which is pretty fast for hunting and pecking, but I'm above 70 touch typing. And so it'd be best for me to switch to that. It will help me in the kind of content production department. I'll be able to go faster for that. I also spend a lot of time considering kind of my workflows for the teleprompter, which I haven't really used that much yet because I need to set up some software to kind of split things more into a teleprompter ready format. So I'm going to be writing more on the software development front here in my Python preprocessor application to kind of break out the content that I am currently recording on these slides into just a sentence or two at a time over a larger number of slides so that I can run through it on the teleprompter more seamlessly. So that and how I'm going to process these videos, how I can automate more of the process so that I'll be able to kind of increase my throughput while maintaining the quality and the functionality that I want. And so maybe not very interesting stuff, but what I would call, like I said, investing in the future, hoping that in the long term, some of the legwork that I'm doing here up front in the beginning will kind of pay off to yield a higher quality with a higher throughput than I would otherwise have. So these were my excuses, 4 of them there. I don't know if people are interested in that, but these were some of the reasons, some of the other things I was doing this cycle instead of writing more ministry content. Although, like I said, I had a number of things go up. So that's what I have done now through April 17th. And so we'll see exactly when I get the next one of these up. It might be several weeks. It might be a little bit longer than that. Like I said, going to be helping my roommate for the next little bit. But I may get around to actually polishing some of the stuff I have close. So thanks for listening. And I hope this has been helpful in giving people an idea of what I've been up to for the last little bit.